You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 98. Today I'll be talking to Annie Owens. So my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're listening from Spotify or Apple Podcasts, be sure to give the show a rating. You can also connect with the show on Instagram at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist and editor Annie Owens. Annie creates beautifully somber watercolor paintings, oftentimes of gloomy female characters or old houses. But her personal art practice is only one of the reasons why she's so well known in the art community. Her and her husband Daniel co-founded and are chief editors of High Fructose magazine. In our conversation, we talk about how she went from earning a degree in filmmaking to starting up a popular art magazine. We also talk about how she balances those responsibilities with her personal art career, the show her and Daniel recently curated at ThinkSpace Gallery, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Annie Owens. Annie, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. And then let's dive into your background a little bit. I believe, and I know that you've lived in the Bay Area for a really long time, but I believe I read that you grew up in Alabama. Alabama and the Philippines, I think I also read. So what was the area like where you grew up for most of your upbringing?
Actually, here, I was born in Alabama, but we moved when I was an infant to... My mom and my brother and I moved to the Philippines, and my brother and I stayed there until I was about 3. She was a single mom. She was freshly divorced, and she's from the Philippines, and she needed some financial help, so dropped me and my brother off for a little while so that she could dig her heels in better, moved herself to San Francisco and got established. And so my brother came back. I think she called for him back a little bit sooner than me. So I was there until I was about 3. And then, it was time for me to come back home. And that's when we all kind of landed in San Francisco. So that would have been 60, 70, maybe 71, 72, 1972.
Okay. So then most of your memories are probably from San Francisco then. You probably don't have much or any memories from Alabama, and then maybe a little bit from Philippines?
Yeah, I have a little bit from Philippines, which is funny because they're mostly kind of snapshot type memories. And, I got really close with my grandparents there and my cousins. And I do have some memories of Alabama because when my grandfather died, we all kind of went back for the funeral, and I was about 4 and my brother was 6. And weirdly enough, that really kind of put a lot of solid memories in my head. So, I don't know, maybe it's just kind of trying to hang on to a different part of my family. Maybe that's why I retained it as much. But yeah, a lot of my growing up years was San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, which my grandparents lived, and my mom lives up in Diamond Heights. So they babysat me a lot. And funnily enough, this is a funny thing for a little kid to say because you don't say the qualifiers. So my mom married my dad's brother when I was about 5 or 6, and so we all moved. We all lived in San Francisco together. And as a kid, people would be asked, "Oh, what's your dad's name?" And I would say his name, and I'd say he's my uncle too. and I would just get the funniest looks. And my mom, had to kind of clear that up for a lot of people.
Yeah. What kind of work did they do? Your uncle slash dad and your mom?
Well, he was in the National Guard. Very, blue collar family. He was in the National Guard, and he had a lot of different jobs. And my mom, she worked as a secretary. Back then, they called them secretaries, and she worked. Gosh, she worked in so many different places, like Dole, like the Dole
Oh,
Pineapple
yeah.
Company. Those company picnics were really fun. That's just what I remember. Like we would go to Marine World and have a ton of pineapple. um, and then she worked at a law firm in San Francisco, and that was a pretty rocky marriage. So I mean, he drank a lot. I loved him to death, but he drank a lot, and she ended up having to have a ton of responsibility on her shoulders. So they divorced. They divorced by the time I was 16.
Okay. And did they give you much exposure to the arts as a kid? Like, is it something that you felt like you had around you growing up?
I did, but not by way of my parents.
Hmm.
My cousins, Dennis and Gigi, also came from the Philippines. They were older than me, and I think ended up naturally being influenced by them. We spent a lot of time at my aunt's house, and so they were kind of like the de facto big brother and sister. Introduced us to music, introduced us to art. Gigi had a whole stack of, I don't know, Charles Adams. Do you remember those pocket books? He did a bunch of pocket books, like
Hmm.
little soft cover, and I would just go through her library of stuff, and I got really, really influenced by that. She was also an artist. She went to school for art. Dennis was very artistic, and he was in a band. They were just really cool. Like they were like
Nice.
our cool older cousins.
Yeah. And so is that how you got your creative spark and took an interest in making art yourself?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I think some people are they kind of come packaged with some things that they have an aptitude for. Like some people have an aptitude for math or playing music. Mine was drawing. I was one of those kids that would always be drawing and didn't really think much of it. My uncle also was very creative on my mom's side. He was an architect, but he started out doing fashion illustration. But I think just by virtue of necessity, my family had jobs that needed to pay the bills, so we weren't really super driven by being artists. I mean, that's not to say my mom noticed. My mom did notice, and she tried to make sure that I had materials. I mean, she didn't have money to buy me art materials, so she would come home with back in the 70s. In the offices, instead of having flat pieces of stacked paper that you printed off of, they were reams.
Sure, yeah.
And she would come home with reams under her arm of paper from the office that I would draw on, and she would bring me back pencils and erasers, and just always wanted to make sure I had things. And then my grandfather, and he would come and visit. I was very attached to him, and he always made sure that I had drawing supplies, like actual drawing supplies. Like that was a big deal. Like I got I think it was actually my mom though. She bought me my first real drawing table and real drawing pads and things like that. So she did her best to kind of foster that.
Mm. And so, like, it's one thing to, I guess, foster the creative side just as something that a person likes, but actually encouraging it as a career path. Were they supportive of that path for you? As like, you were said earlier that they tended to be a bit, by necessity, had to be more pragmatic with their career choices. Were they trying to nudge you in that direction too, or did they give you that freedom to go in whatever direction that you wanted to?
My mom was really cool. She, in that way, it's funny because we weren't really, super warmly close, but I could tell she wanted the best for me. So she would always make sure her thing was just make sure you have the skills to, feed yourself and clothe yourself. So, do whatever it is you got to do, but if you want to do art, I'll try to support you. But just by watching her and seeing what she had to do to support two kids, she wasn't really pushing me in that direction. I remember, people would come over for holidays and things and go, "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'm like, I don't know. I guess I want to be a veterinarian, because it never occurred to me. And people didn't say that I could be an artist as a grown up. And then my aunt was always, and my auntie aunt, her sister was, she was great, but I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what a graphic designer was.
Right.
At 8 or 9, I'm like, I don't know what that is. It doesn't sound very interesting to me. Right. And that was her way of being like, well, this is the way you could be in art and not starve. Looking back, I think, I'm like, I don't know what a graphic designer is. I don't know what an artist is. It seemed like this magical being that you just kind of became. I didn't know that you went to school for art. But when I got older, my mom, she could I started going really sideways. So fast forward, high school, early 20s. I guess you could describe me as someone who had gone off the rails. I mean, I wasn't crazy or anything, but I left home really early. We weren't getting along. And I think she could see that I needed some redirection. Didn't want me to go completely sideways. And so she's like, I don't have any money for you to go to college. This is when I was out of high school. Like, I didn't really put much thought into college anyway. But after a few years, things were getting really rough. And then she came back and said, listen, if you want to go to art school, I can help make that happen. And that was really wonderful, because she just she had a ton of money,
Yeah.
So that's how that happened. I went to art school. For some reason, I chose
filmmaking, right? Yeah. I was going to ask you, like, how did that happen?
I got really interested in photography, and music videos really became. Do you remember the videos from Tool or Floria Sigismondi?
Yeah.
We did a ton of really cool videos, and
the stop motion stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I want to do that. That seems really lucrative, especially since I don't live in LA. I had no concept, right. And so that's what I went out. That's what I went for. I did the whole 4 years. I got a bachelor's degree in that. Meanwhile, she's like, "Are you sure you don't want to do fine art? Seems like you might want to do fine art." I'm like, I don't want to do fine art. What's fine art? I still like. Somebody going to teach me how to paint? I already know how to paint. I didn't think I needed help in drawing. So I was still pretty kind of clueless. But I loved it. I really loved the program. I enjoyed it, and I'm really glad I did it. Still haven't made a movie. I promised my grandmother that by the time I was 50 that I would make a movie, because I had a child too. I by the time I graduated, 89, 92, I think she was about 6 years old. And so I was going to school, and I was a single mom. I had a lot of help. But the opportunities I was seeing some opportunities, but they all required me to leave her with my mother for very long periods of time, possibly moving to LA. And so that was kind of a really strange conundrum. Like, well, I just finished 4 years of very expensive art school to go and do film, and I've got opportunities, and I just didn't feel comfortable being that absent from her life. Sure. And which is, we won't get into this part because it's really, it's kind of a drag, but I was not the most present for her, because I was just doing so many other things and also pretty confused at the same time. So all of these decisions, they seemed like the wrong decisions. Like, maybe I should have gone to LA. Maybe I should have tried that path, and maybe I could have come back and provided for her better. But instead, I went in a different direction. So I didn't go
While you were in school for filmmaking, did you have opportunities? Like, did you take classes that were more like painting and drawing oriented, or were you completely like, what's fine art? I don't care anymore.
I actually, I wanted to take a class. I forgot what it was, but it required a drawing class prerequisite. And back then I was like, oh, I already know how to draw. I don't need to do that. So I met with the director, and he was like, draw me a picture of a shoe and an apple. And I did, which seems really funny to me now. And so that took care of the prerequisite. But I did take some fine art classes, and they were extremely helpful. I was like, wow, I actually don't know how to draw, or I didn't know how to draw, figure drawing, figure painting. A lot of the really helpful and really interesting ones to me were related to photography and color theory and lighting. That was really great. And I think that kind of feeds into what I do now, or at least I hope it does.
Nice. Yeah. And so like, you mentioned having all of these opportunities if you had made the choice to go to LA. So instead of that, you stayed in, I guess, the Bay Area. What kind of work were you doing like right out of school just to pay the bills?
Yeah, well, it did become strictly just to pay the bills. So I dropped it all. I needed to leave my mom's house. We still weren't getting along. I didn't get along with her, didn't get along with my stepdad. And I felt like I just needed to have my own life with my daughter. So I started temping. I started doing a lot of office work in San Francisco. I should add that before I even got pregnant, I was a bike messenger in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
I was about 19 and 20. That was fun. It was a really fun little sweet spot. My boss then, I remember him saying, can you come to my office? This is my bike messenger boss. And I go, yeah, sure. And I go, and he goes, do you think it might be time for you to not do this anymore? I was like, well, why? He goes, it looks like you're pregnant. And I went, well, I am. He goes, I don't think it's safe for you. And he wasn't really firing me, but he was like, I think you should probably not do this anymore. And by that time I was, 6 months pregnant. And, that's just kind of like a throwback. Then I started slinging muffins at this place called Muffins on Kern Street, Kearney. Anyway. Okay. So fast forward to, what I was doing to pay the bills after school and raise my daughter. I started temping. I started doing office work, and that led me to, really, really fast forward, led me to working, at UC Berkeley as a finance analyst, which is really strange. LB&L, I went to Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and it was like really great career job. It was just kind of like a step by step, trying to get a better job, up and up and up. And, I could pay my bills. I could pay my daughter's bills. She had benefits. I was a responsible parent. We were still living at my mom's, and we moved out eventually. And by then my daughter didn't want to be with me. She was just like, you're annoying. Grandma's nice. I would rather stay with them.
Aww.
It's a little more complicated than that, but that's what I did. That's what I did to pay bills.
Okay. And had you already started like developing your personal art practice at that point, like on the side?
Yeah. I was kind of doing it always in the background. I never really took it seriously. I don't feel like I had the confidence to take it seriously, and it's not anybody's fault. Like, it's not my mother's fault or the people who are around me supporting me. But it just didn't occur to me to try to be a fine artist. It was like, oh, this is just going to be a hobby.
Sure. And one thing that I found mention of, but couldn't find any evidence of actually existing. So I wanted to ask you, Ouch Club, the comic? Was that a comic at one point? I read somewhere that they're like comic artist of Ouch Club comic in some like old interview. Oh, and I was like, I know that's the name of your website, but I didn't find any like evidence of that actually being a comic. So I have no idea, but I wanted to ask.
Yeah, gosh, how did that start? Okay, so I met Daniel Ada. You're going to hear me call him Ada. You're going to hear me call him Daniel. It's kind of interchangeable. He's my husband now and my partner, high fructose and everything. And when we first met, he was kind of this dynamo of doing all kinds of things. He was a performer in Ataboyenburg. He had just come off a job as a toy designer, and he was a fine artist, and he was doing all of these things. And I was like, this guy is, I've never met anybody like that before. And he noticed my drawings, and he was like, oh, do you draw? And he seemed really impressed by that. And I was like, yeah, I kind of draw. And he goes, well, I think he was the one that asked if I had a website. And I was like, why would I have that? I had all these drawings. So I said, oh, maybe I should make a website, because he showed me his. And also at the time, even before I met him, I had joined a couple of, back in the 90s, there was kind of this forum culture, like you would kind of meet other artists online, and it felt really intimate, and it wasn't hundreds and thousands of people. It was like a few, right. And you actually got to know people online. And at first I was like, this is kind of weird, it's like creepy people online, and it was very supportive, and you could see people's drawings, and I could see that there was this contingent of people doing sequential art. They didn't call it comics, but it was art, comics and sequential art, and they were, posting them in the forums and posting them online. I was like, that's so cool, because what I was already drawing was what I considered to be kind of panels, almost like the way Charles Addams was doing, like single panel drawings or 3-panel drawings without any words. And I was like, I thought, hey, that's where I could show people on that forum. And I wasn't publishing on paper or anything, but I was like, I'm going to call this my comics. And that's really all that was.
Oh, wow.
So, back to having met Daniel, he had already published, I might be getting this wrong historically, but he had already published his own book of poems and drawings, and before he met me. And he was working on something. God, why am I'm spacing. He put together this comic book, an anthology. We knew a bunch of people, and he grabbed together a bunch of comic artists, like I think Andy Restaino. I'm completely spacing. I don't know if Jordan Crane, Kurt Halsey. These were people who were doing comics and art and not really putting a label on it. So he put together this comic anthology called I Hate Cartoons. And he said, you should put yours in. And so I did. And nice. That was probably, my first time getting published. And it was a really cute thing, And Ouch Club was just something that I named myself. Like I've always been really awkward and never had a ton of friends. And, it was like, well, it's just my club. It's just me.
That's amazing. I mean, it's amazing that I found that like tiny niche that like hadn't really, that was a very small part of like your development, but I think also really like important, because it was right at this time, or it sounds like it was right at the early stages of what ultimately developed into high fructose in your life. So like, let's talk about that a little bit. Founded in 2005 by you and Daniel. How did that like early relationship develop into a publishing empire or this really long running magazine that's become so popular?
So we had been now I have to count on my fingers. We were in a relationship by that point, about 5 years. We had a rough patch. We broke up for a few months and came back together. And Daniel's like this. Even now he'll wake up and go, I have this idea. And I go, no kidding. And it will be something completely crazy that just came to him in the night. And so I feel like this was one of them. But so we would be, we were both artists. We would go to bookstores together, as you do as a couple. And we would look through the art magazines. And I think we both kind of individually and together agreed that there was not a whole lot of art being covered. There was, I don't want to say living room art magazines, just like the kind of like fine art magazines that were kind of boring. And then there was Juxtapose, and we both read Juxtapose, had been also many years back. And I think around that time, it seemed like even they were kind of really mostly zeroing in on art that seemed to be mostly graffiti or street art inspired. Meanwhile, we knew of all these other people that were around us just by virtue of being artists and living in the Bay Area and just being connected, in our various forums. There were so many other artists making art that wouldn't have fit into any of those magazines. And I never would have thought, like, hey, let's make a magazine of our own. So one day he goes, we should make a magazine. I was like, yeah, okay. That sounds like a great idea. And that was the way that happened.
Wow.
And we made one issue, and I think he and I will tell this story differently, but I don't really believe that either one of us thought that we were going to make any more beyond issue 1. And I think we even called it issue 1 or volume 1 as a joke, as if there were going to be more. And he had money, he funded it. He already knew how to publish since he had already self-published his own books. And he already knew a printer who we still use. This guy printed his very first book, and we followed him. We followed this guy through different companies because we liked him so much.
Amazing.
And so, yeah, he's still the guy that heads up all of our publishing in Canada. So we did issue 1. We just kind of picked out a bunch of artists that we already knew. Like, hey, this person, and also at the time, the vinyl toys were becoming a thing, and so every magazine needs to have like a little like masthead at the top where you have like the title, and then over on the corner you have this art magazine. It has to say art magazine or food magazine or health magazine. It has to
Right.
say what it is. But we thought that would be funny to just say under the counter culture magazine, like just making shit up,
Right.
because it wasn't in stores. And people started buying them. This is really his brainchild, but Daniel had a relationship with, I'm completely spacing, Last Gasp based in San Francisco, Last Gasp Publishing and Distribution. And because he had those comic books in the past, and they were distributing his stuff, and so they were like, "Yeah, we'll take some." And so I don't remember when that happened, but I think it was pretty early on. I might have been the first issue. That's how we started getting them into not stores, but they were. I forgot the details, but we had a relationship with Last Gasp very early. And I don't remember when we started doing subscriptions, and I'm going to say air quote subscriptions because it's literally just 2 people. And I wish I had issue 1 in front of me. I don't think that there were any ads in it, but we did a number 2, an issue 2. I wish he was in here right now so we could remember why we did issue 2, but we actually had to borrow money from his brother, and we did it like 3 or 4 months later. And that's when we learned that if you want to be a continual, like a periodical, you had to have a schedule so that if you wanted to have advertisers, even galleries or artists, you had to have a schedule, and they needed to know when you were going to come out. And we were learning all of these things. And Charlie lent us some money. That was Daniel's brother. Daniel was able to pay him back. And at some point, we started subscriptions. And that was literally writing out people would write and send their checks to us, and we would draw on the envelopes, do little drawings each, and hand address them and put stamps on them and bring them to the post office. And then it became this little enterprise where we had the kids from the video store down the street come and work for us. So we'd have like a powwow of people sitting around boxes, because all of the boxes were in our living room. And that was our furniture. And it was really silly and fun. But obviously that grew, and it became a little out of hand, and we needed to figure out a way to start printing labels and not handwriting things. And That was crazy.
Yeah. And so like in those early days, it sounds like you guys were doing everything from graphic design to layouts to, I guess you had somebody helping you with publishing, the actual printing, the physical printing of it. But as far as everything else goes, it was just you two, right?
Oh yeah, I forgot to say, we didn't have any writers, so we wrote under these pseudonyms. He and I would write, and I'm just like, this is not right. This is not. We can't. We have to do right by the artist and actually have real writers. And so I forgot when we were doing. We started getting actual writers on board, and they were a lot of early on. It was our smarter friends. Like, hey, Michael M, could you, and that was a good step. So all these little steps happened by way of just kind of, you know, learning by trial by fire.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that like that first, after that first issue, you said that, hey, we were just kind of jokingly putting issue 1 on it. When did it shift from this is a joke and we're just doing this one to, okay, we're actually going to do number 2? Like, how did that, I mean, I think after 2, you kind of explained that, but that mind shift from, hey, we're going to do this joking little thing to, oh, we're actually going to take this seriously,
Yeah, because it doesn't. The money making part of it was not lucrative. It still isn't lucrative, but we got money to make the next issue, right? So the first issue paid for a little bit of the second issue, and then so on and so forth. We couldn't really do it ourselves, and I should add that I was still working full time at Lawrence Berkeley Labs as a finance analyst, and he was working full time, doing toy design and all of the different things that he did. He did a lot of freelance. So we were both just exhausted working around the clock all the time and also trying to make art. So massively frazzled. If I remember correctly, I know he's going to be like, I heard your podcast and you don't remember that, right? I do that to him too. I think that because Last Gasp, because of our relationship with Last Gasp, we had some exposure, and we were approached by a publisher, a really large publisher, Ingram Periodicals, and they contacted us and said, hey, here's what a contract looks like if you want us to start distributing you. That way you can be in Barnes and Noble and Hastings and Borders and all these stores. And I'm so glad I read that contract back to back, because we did eventually join with them, but not at that time, because it would have killed us. Their payment schedule, because each issue had to pay for the next issue, and without that money, that direct sales, we wouldn't be able to make another issue. And in order to fulfill, to be in Barnes & Noble, you had to make a lot more magazines, which cost a ton more money, like so many thousands of dollars. And yes, we would have been in bigger stores, but their payment schedule was, I think, 90 days after the off-sale date. So that's way past. We were printing, like, say every 3 months. So 90 days after the off-sale date, we wouldn't see any returns for a long, long time. And neither one of us was comfortable taking out a loan. And so we said, no, that would kill us. We can't do it. And then some issues later, we called him back and said, hey, I think we can do this now. And that was a really good move.
Nice.
Yeah.
So it was more about just getting that financial foundation under you to get you to the point where you were ready for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think some years after that, I was able to quit my day job, which was a massively huge step, because in my family, my mom was finally proud of me. She was like, you have a career job. You're making good money. You're responsible. You get dressed up for work. You go to meetings, and I she was like, her daughter has finally become this big girl. My daughter was 18, and I was like, I can't quit this job until my daughter is at least out of high school. and because benefits and stuff and medical. And so I waited, and that was so scary. That was one of the scariest things I'd ever done. And I did not have the blessing of my family. And understandably so. I mean, she watched me, fall on my face so many times. And here I am, just kind of killing the best thing that I had ever kind of built up for myself. I mean, I think she was, okay, this high fructose thing is fine. It's great. But, you know, you have a job and I can't believe you're going to let go of it. It was really scary. And it was.
Yeah.
But as a person who, doesn't really thrive in an environment, I'm not a team player. I don't know, maybe I'm a kind of, I tend to lean towards introversion, and it was also kind of a personal choice I needed to make. Going day to day in an environment where I just didn't fit in, and sort of masking every day. I mean, I know everyone has to kind of put their best face forward, but this was truly like, I'm a liar. This is not me. I can't be here. It was hard. It was really depressing. I started taking antidepressants for the first time in my whole life because I had gotten this brand new job. It was really great. I was part of a really killer team, and it was just really hard. I can't describe what it's like to kind of come home, and it sounds like a strange poor me kind of thing. Like, but here now I have a chance to like work by myself and be in my head, and only see my husband, and how perfect is that? So that was one of the reasons why I've got to try this thing that seems perfect for me. I know art. I understand art. I understand these artists. I don't understand these scientists. I don't do well with money and figures. For some reason, my boss really liked me, but I was pretending to be good at my job. And the folks I was working with were brilliant. They were brilliant, and they really loved their jobs. And my boss loved her job, and I really liked her. And I was like, I kind of want to be like Deb, only in my version of Deb. Like, she was the boss, and I kind of wanted to be able to own what I was doing. And I didn't think that I could ever feel like that unless I understood thoroughly what I was working with and the material I was working with.
And I think there's something to be said about just the exhaustion of having to put on a facade every day to go to work, and how wearing that can be. I mean, it's almost like Mr. Rogers putting on his jacket, when he gets home or whatever, and taking it off. It's like you're doing that, but as a human being, going into a place that you felt out of place,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so as the magazine matured and your business grown, have the way that you and Daniel kind of worked, other than just not doing all the things now, have the way that you guys work together as far as your editorial or curatorial process changed much in those years?
Actually, that part hasn't changed. That's the part I think that has stayed the most constant, is we both curate, we both edit. The parts that have changed because the administrative behind the scenes things have changed and grown as we've changed and grown. So he does all of the layouts because he knows how to do that, and he's really great at it. And I do things like, I do all the office stuff because I'm really great at that. I'm a complete, Excel wizard, just because I had other jobs doing stuff like that. And so we split those tasks that way. But as far as the creative part, he and I do that almost equally. And it just kind of happens organically. And it's the same now as it was back then, where we would go, hey, well, what about this artist? What about this artist? And no, I think that would be better next issue. And that's going to look too similar, and they won't shine if they're next to each other. And sometimes we'll play this kind of little poker game where he really wants somebody in this issue, and I think that it would be better for next issue, or vice versa. So we've learned to kind of bluff each other, like, oh, I'll think about that one. What about this one? And he'll go, oh, yeah, okay. And then I'll come back and be like, well, we can do that one. But in the long run, at the end, we'll be working on a whole bunch of stories, and you stand back towards the end of the production and look at everything, and if it looks cohesive, that's the way it's going to print. But if it looks like we don't want one artist to, it's not that people look the same. It's not that artists look the same. It's not that. It's that sometimes there are similarities in color and detail that you want people to be able to shine on their own. So, we'll hold one back and then let that go forward for the next issue. And then, you can kind of see a theme building too sometimes when an issue comes together. And so we'll kind of curate it down to that as well. Nice.
Having two chief editors, how do you generally navigate like disagreements? I mean, you mentioned like this kind of poker game, but like, I mean, is there more like formal way that you kind of navigate some of these differences of opinions?
Not really. I mean, we have a powwow. We do our powwow sessions in the kitchen. And we'll do, the most formal meeting that we can. Come to the kitchen with our pen and paper. We'll write everything down, and we'll talk it out. We'll talk it out, and we have lots of disagreements, but they're fun. They're fun disagreements, and they kind of, we have a lot of really interesting conversations as far as like, why this and not that, or wait on this and go forward with that. I would say half of what we do is disagreeing with each other. Yeah.
I mean, it's good that that's a healthy aspect of, the work, because it can be, ways of, I guess inspecting differences of opinion. And there's, I think, a strength in that.
There is. It's neat. I really love working with him. It never gets old. In the early days, the one big thing that did change in the early days was that we didn't have a lot of personal space. We lived in an apartment where my literal office was in this kitchen nook, and he had his own office with doors because he was working from home, and he really needed that privacy for his freelance work. But living with someone was so novel for him that he would I would come home from my job and go to my office in the kitchen and start working. And that would be his break time. And he'd just kind of look over at me, looking at me all the time, smiling and I'd just be like, what are you doing? I'm trying to work. He's like, I think it's really neat that I've got my girlfriend here. We weren't married yet. I'm just like, stop looking at me. I didn't have a door. I would just get so cranky. Just be like, stop freaking looking at me. I'm like, okay, it's neat that we're working together. Just like, oh my God.
What am I doing?
Yeah. So we were able to move we bought a house at the lowest possible time at the housing crisis, and I remember our mortgage was literally $1 more than our rent.
Wow.
We moved to Richmond, and I was just like, I have a room with doors, and he can't look at me anymore and bugger me. And
That's amazing.
All that to say was just kind of learning and respecting each other's personal space and headspace. Because we live and work together, there was never a cutoff time to when to not talk about high fructose stuff, because it was all the time. And it starts to change a relationship. Like, what are we just roommates and coworkers now? And so that was a process to learn how to do. And we actually had to formally say, at this time, we're not going to talk about work. And, in this room, we're not going to talk about high fructose. And every now and then it would bleed into it and kind of stop it.
It's so good that y'all were so intentional about that, because I could definitely see how that would complicate. I mean, spending all of your time with somebody, both in and out of work. How do you do that in a way that doesn't, I guess, harm one side or the other side of the relationship,
Yeah, it was really tough. I will, say that was a hard lesson to learn. And, we didn't have knock 'em out, drag 'em out fights, but we did have it was tough. We had a tough time with our relationship because we didn't recognize, why are we so mad at each other all the time? Why is there so much, hostility? And we were just tired in our heads. And it was a sit down thing where I think we were both kind of worried that something might have to change in a big way if we don't start, figuring this out. And we did, thankfully. But that was massive. Yeah.
Very cool. So, like we talked about earlier, you started the magazine in 2005. At what point did you really start to take your personal art seriously and give that more presence in your career?
I think this sounds very not feminist to say, but he's my partner, and he was the first person to kind of say something that made me think I could be an artist, like an actual artist. And also at the time, in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, there were all these little, not just galleries, but little showings, like just regular folks who really liked art would be around and curate like a garage show or like a pop-up thing that would, exist for a night or a week. And also at the same time, I was still in contact with these forum folks, and somebody would say, "Hey, Annie, are you gonna submit a piece for this thing in San Francisco, or this thing in Oakland?" And it very informal, where you're like literally clipping your art up onto laundry lines and things like that. But it was, I think that's when it clicked. Was he was like, "Well, I don't even remember what he said, but it was something that he said that I was like, oh, maybe I can start showing something. Maybe I can show something. Maybe I can do this." And that's when it started. So it was really early in our relationship. But again, I was still working full time. I was doing the magazine. So anything art wise took a back seat.
Yeah. I mean, balancing two jobs is hard enough, but if you're also like on the kind of fostering a third aspect of your career, like how do you balance all of that?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think back to the very first, I was painting. I was painting, but I would, sell them to friends if they wanted. But I think the first time I showed in a gallery was this gallery called Gallery AD in San Jose. And I think they're still around. They had a group show, and Daniel knew of them too. I think he had already shown with them, and they were just doing a group show. And I put a piece in, and I sold it. And then there was another one. God, I can't remember. It was in Oakland. And I wish I could remember the curator, and I wish I could remember the place just to give him a shout out, because that was really neat. That was just really cool. That was, those things were few and far between. Oh, and then Daniel and I did a 2-person show together with our friend Rob. He owned a gallery, and I really wish I could remember the name, but Daniel and I did a show called Swarmy Weather, and he put in work and I put in work, and that was something. But I think I was trying to be serious at that point.
And was it only after you left the job at Berkeley that you had enough time to actually do it more seriously?
Yep. By then I could have time and make work for other group shows, like another group show. It was in LA. I think my very first solo show, though, was with Rivet Gallery in Ohio.
Columbus, I think, right?
Yeah, Columbus, Ohio. So Laura gave me my very first show, and that was a big deal.
Which is interesting because it's like almost on the other side of the country from where you are. So how did you make that relationship and get that showing opportunity?
Just by virtue of like being around. We would go to Comic Cons, and wait, did I meet Laura there? No, I don't remember how I met her, but you just kind of know of people. You traffic the same places online. We may have met at a Comic Con. I don't remember how I met her, but she was doing a lot of stuff. She was always everywhere, and she liked my work.
Very cool. So talking about the work itself, one of the strong focuses of your work is very uniquely stylized, I would say, in the same way that like Troy Brooks's work is uniquely stylized and immediately recognizable. I think your work is very similarly immediately recognizable. Often gloomy or pensive in nature. So like, who are these people? Who are the characters in your work, and how do they like correlate in some way to your own life?
Well, thank you for that compliment. I like the gloomy. I'm glad people can see that. Things just kind of come about organically. And the figures in my work, I think, aren't necessarily characters, but just another element. And I choose humans because maybe that's just the way I am. That's as far as my brain can go, is I'm going to use a human to convey human emotions. Some people will use animals and landscapes and things like that. I think it's kind of my own inner monologue, really. I am very inward. I don't talk a lot, as you might notice. I try to figure a lot of things out about myself, I think, through my art. I don't do that purposely, but over the course of several years, I think I look back and, obviously that's what I'm doing. I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about what's going on inside me, my thoughts or my feelings without using words. And, it's nice to be able to see that anybody might relate to it. So it's kind of a validation that what I think and where I'm going and what's in my head isn't necessarily just me. It's nice to kind of feel like, oh, someone is relating to it. Someone is, I've connected to someone.
Yeah.
But as far as like, having a hard boiled description of this one is about this and this painting is about that, it's not really like that. It's more thematically, for example, I've been asked about the houses, do a lot of floating houses. And so I've had an opportunity to think about why I do those. And to me, they're just fun, but I think it kind of goes back to family. Houses are kind of like, maybe they're a character. The houses are a character, and with them floating, it's sort of like a house that isn't grounded, in a sad way, but in a positive way, it's kind of like this lofty, ethereal, kind of up in the air. I don't know. There's just something really sweet about floating.
Well, I mean, floating can be negative in the sense that it's not on firm foundation, but it also could be seen as positive as an untethered,
Yes.
Freedom to go anywhere,
Yeah. Untethered, but also kind of seeking. I always felt like there was like this seeking thing with the houses. Like, my mom and my stepdad, they were wonderful people. I loved them both, but it was a really tumultuous household to live in. I didn't really feel connected to my paternal side of the family. And I guess I wanted to kind of understand where I came from in that way. A lot of the nurturing I got was from my mother's side, so I felt, I guess I didn't explore that as much in my art because I felt like maybe that was more solid. And so a lot of the stuff that comes out in my art feels to me like what I remember as kind of like a southern sultry summer night, in the South. I really held on to those few memories from Alabama, and also North Carolina. We lived there for a little while. And maybe just trying to kind of understand or feel connected to that.
Yeah. In the first couple of sentences when you were describing, you said the word feeling a couple times. And so I'm kind of curious, is your work to you more about telling a story in kind of a narrative way, or establishing a feeling and like expressing an emotion as a way of, I guess, introspection?
Yeah, I think it's more about introspection and establishing a mood. And I do think that I don't want it to be all moody, but it's nice to kind of hint at a story. I think more in the last few years with figures and stuff, there are figures who are doing something or entering a room or leaving a room or something like that. To me, that's more almost like like a snapshot of a piece of a story that's about to happen or just finished. I think that's what's going on lately.
Do you have that story in your head, the larger story of the thing that happened just after the scene or the thing that just happened before, or does that not matter to you too much?
Sometimes I think about what's going on, like what's she doing? There's one that I really like that I painted recently for a Rock LaRue show. I think it was last year. It's called Twinning. The title is Twinning, and it's a woman who is about to enter a hotel room. She's got her suitcase, and it's from inside the room. So you see this edge of a bed with feet, and it's clearly like her feet because it's got, her shoes on. And so she's kind of walking in to a motel room where she herself is already occupying it. And to me, that's sort of like a transitional moment and what's going on there. And I don't have a story exactly of what's happening there, but I think it's interesting to me that I did that.
Yeah. Have you, with your degree in film and saying that you had promised certain people that you'd make a film one day, have you ever thought about developing some of these into larger stories and bringing them to film?
Oh my gosh, all the time, especially now people are making iPhone films. Like, maybe I can actually, I really want to, but I think I would need a small team of people. And I know of one guy who is just like ready, he's a filmmaker, and he's like, Annie, whenever you want to. But he's busy too. And I need to pull it together. So, I hope I can do it, even just a 5-minute film, just to say I did it.
Yeah, of course. I'm kind of curious about your palette. Very monochromatic, or at least a limited palette, which I think is another distinctive quality of your work. What motivates your choice of colors and the way that you use color?
I don't know. I think I'm just really comfortable in that monochromatic zone. And I am attracted to very colorful art. Like a lot of my favorite art now is just bursting with color. And I have tried to go into like more color. I started, kind of tippy toeing into it yet still monochrome, but blue instead of gray. And I'm just not comfortable with color. I don't like it. I don't like to paint that way. I don't know why. I just really like all of the different subtle hues that you get. It looks dreamier to me. I feel like it's less realistic. I like that quality of just that dreamlike feeling.
Awesome. How do you generally approach ideation or arrive at new ideas? Do you have intentional brainstorming sessions where you work these ideas out, or is it more of like an organic sketch routine that you do daily and build the ideas out of those, or what's your process?
I wish I had one. I don't. I want to draw every day, and I try, but it's a challenge, and so I don't do that a lot of times when I'm trying to become the kind of artist that is really prolific and draws every day, because I'm not. And I think that there's a lot to be had, a lot to come out of that. Like, I think the best ideas come out of when I'm doing a lot of drawing. And then I'll look back and go, oh, that's a cool position, or that's a really neat, hazy little background that I just came up with on the fly. And then I can combine things. But when I feel like I need to make something, I have a deadline, I'll look back at my sketchbook, and find things that I drew in a moment where I was feeling really fluid. Trying to make something happen it feels really forced, and I think you can tell, at least I can tell, when I'm trying to make something happen on the page, and it feels really stiff to me. So the more I can draw every day, the better I think I have. So I'm just building up a whole, group of things I can choose from later. But as far as ideas, they'll come to me from books. Sometimes I'll hear a really cool phrase from a book, or I'll hear somebody say something really neat and be like, oh, that's going to be the name of my new show. And and that'll get my gears going, and it'll get my gears going back into my own head, like, oh, this kind of speaks to that part of me that I really want to figure out.
Interesting. And like once you do have a solid idea that you want to kind of move forward and develop further, how do you build out or develop the composition for that? Do you do like a series of sketches that just become more and more refined, or you just jump right into painting?
No, gosh, I wish I could do that. I do a whole bunch of sketches. And if it's going to be a scene, I'll draw it out small, like a little square, almost like a, when movies make the little, I'm spacing, but just like little stick figures almost, just like block out the scene with the figure's going to go here and the trees in the background are going to go there. And this is where I want the shadow to go. And then I'll do another drawing from that. I might pick, like I said, a sketch of a figure that I did before and redraw it. And I do use Photoshop a lot, and I have a light table that I layer things on top of just so I can move things around.
Oh, nice.
And when I've got my composition, I'll draw it out, and then I'll, take a picture of it and put it into Photoshop, blow it up to the size of my paper, and then print it out on, however many pieces of paper it requires, and then tape all that down, put it on my light table, and then put my watercolor, my final piece of paper on top. And I'm really, probably more peculiar about keeping my paper clean than I should be. I can't stand it when there's a mistake or a blob that winds up somewhere.
Yeah. Well, because watercolor can be unforgiving. I mean, it's
It can be. I watch other watercolor artists, and I'm just blown away by how they make things happen on a page. And I don't paint like that. I'm not trained in watercolor, so I do it my way, and it's really slow and kind of impractical. So a lot of the watercolors I do use are in liquid form, and those sink into the paper. And so sometimes you can kind of do like some watercolor tricks to rub it out, and you take it out and absorb it and make it go away. But when some of the materials I use, it just sinks into the paper, and once it's there, it's there. So, I'll be like, oh, can that be a rock, or can that be a meteor? Because it's in the sky now. And I don't do this as often anymore. But I used to just kind of trash an entire painting if something landed in the wrong place. So I had kind of a painting graveyard of multiple paintings of the same one that were started, and that's silly. Just try to work with it more. I'm telling myself, like, try to work with it better.
When does color come into the composition development? You talked about the series of sketches that you make, and then you take it to Photoshop, blow it up, and paint, lay everything down so that you can have everything in the right dimensions. Have you already determined what colors you're going to use by then, or is that part of is that discovery? Does that not happen until you start painting?
Oh no, it happens when I'm planning, and my color is really minimal. It's usually a sky. Like, I really love orange skies, and if I think it's usually going to involve a background, and like, that's going to look really cool against an orange sky. Or this figure has knees, or I have rhinitis. It's a chronic condition with my nose, and I always make sure that she has a red nose. My figures, they've got I love to paint elbows, noses, and knees pink.
At the point where you started on the final piece, it sounds like it's pretty locked down. Does it ever evolve much after that, like as you're painting? No. I mean, other than just like turning blobs into comets occasionally when you need to, is there ever any other like evolution that happens as you go through the painting process?
No, I really like to plan things out, like exactly where things are going to go. Obviously, trees and bushes and things, like the way the sky is going to happen. The water will decide what happens with that. But the elements don't change. Once it's there, it's there. The white in the painting is the white of the paper. Every now and then I'll go in with a white colored pencil, but I like for the white of the painting to be the white of the paper. And so I don't add a lot once I've decided.
Awesome. You have worked in the third dimension on occasion. I know that you've built some of these miniature houses that look amazing, by the way. I mean, that's like a whole skill of its own. Is that something that you just kind of occasionally have inspiration to do? Or like what motivates your choice of when an idea is going to be in 3 dimensions or in 2 dimensions?
Well, now it's just for fun. I do it for, shits and giggles. I've got 2 little paper houses behind me that I made just because I had a ton of creative energy and I just didn't have an idea in my head to draw. It was like, I'm supposed to be drawing, but I'm not. So I'm going to make these. But in the past, I did really larger houses that were made out of wood and balsa and paper. And also, I took from my painting graveyard. So they're old paintings painted over. I did 2 of those for Copper Gallery a long time ago. And then I did a really fat one. It was this huge fat one and it was covered in carpet tacks. And we had to drive it from the Bay Area to LA for La Luz de Jesus show. And, they were trying to help me get it through the door, but I could tell like nobody was happy about having to lift this little house that was covered in carpet tacks because it was poking everyone. That was fun. And that was obviously like, well, this is a version of me. I'm a prickly pear. That's what I've been described as in the past and I can't help it. But I think I got most of that out of my system. I actually built a real house in the woods.
Wow.
It's still there now. I don't own it anymore, but it was a little black witch house in the woods. It's small and tall and black, and it's on extremely rural land in El Dorado County. And it's a witch house in the woods. It's really creepy and cute. I couldn't maintain it anymore, and we were not the type of people that could be a two house household. Like, this is not maintainable, so I had to sell it. But I was like, I remember thinking, I can't believe I wasted so many years building this thing and having it built and putting so much resources into it. Until a friend was like, well, it's kind of like another art project of yours. You spent all these years building a real version of those little black houses that
Right.
you make. After closing, after I sold it, I went back and I signed my name under the deck.
That's amazing. When you're going to build one of these sculpted pieces, whether it's a smaller one like you mentioned earlier or one of the really big ones that you have to haul to Los Angeles in your car, do you generally like sketch those out in advance too, in the same way that you sketch out something that's destined for watercolor?
Oh yeah, I sketch it out. I make a paper pattern, and then I fold the paper pattern to make sure everything fits right. Because the wood, if it's it's going to have to bend, so it's a lot of planning and. It's fun. It was fun, but and I would like to do more, but I would like to focus on painting. So, I would like to apply myself more seriously to my art now, more so than I did even the last few years. Because I think when I was doing that house, and a lot of things were going on in our lives, I think I went through a depression and I really almost stopped making art for maybe 2 years. And I'm making art again. And so I sort of promised myself to start taking it more seriously.
Excellent. Are there any other mediums that you wanted to explore that you just haven't had the opportunity to?
Movies. That's just that. I would really like to make that movie.
Awesome. So in addition to, running a magazine, working an office job at one point and all the, wonderful work that you create, you also curate high fructose gallery shows. It seems like, I think looking at it in 2024, it seems like such a natural thing nowadays with you guys, Juxtaposed, Beautiful Bazaar, all having group shows at different parts of the year, but that wasn't always the case. Like, so how did that start to where you had kind of transitioned or evolved the magazine business into also curating gallery exhibitions on the side?
Man, I don't know. I really don't remember why. I think seeing gallery shows or group shows was something that was kind of natural to see in the art world, in our art world, and I don't remember how this came along, but we did our first group show with Jensen at Gallery 1988 in LA. And that was really fun. I don't remember how or why. I think it was just a kind of natural, like, hey, why don't we do one of these? Seems like it might be fun. It felt like everybody was doing a group show. And I mean, they weren't as prevalent as they are now, but we did. And then the next one was at Copro Gallery, which was super fun. And then the third one after that was at Rock LaRue in Seattle. And each one was really different, you know. So yeah, and now we kind of split it off. Like in the past, it would be both of us curating something together. But sometimes Daniel would have a project or I would have a project, and we would come up with a concept for a show together, but then one of us would head it up. Like right now, so Daniel took the reins for the Line Addict show at ThinkSpace, which is opening on the 19th of October.
Yeah, I think it's this coming weekend, right?
Yeah, that's going to be cool. I mean, the art that's coming in for that is spectacular. And then I'm heading up another show with Kirsten at Rock LaRue that's going to open in 2025. Now, and we did one. Did we do one at Kirsten's? The Tiny Ghost show was really fun. It was totally off the cuff. I think we just wanted something fun to do, and she was just like, "Yeah, let's do it." That was a couple of years ago, so that was really fun. And we did that one together. We kind of did that one kind of in tandem, but sometimes we split off. Like, you know, he'll do one and I'll do one.
I guess how many do you generally put on throughout the year, or what do you aim for usually?
I once a year, if at all. I think you know, for a minute we thought we were going to do a few a year, which is just not feasible. And it's also, you know, it just doesn't work. There's no reason we should have 3 group shows, high fructose group shows a year. So, and we can also put a lot more effort into. We're not a gallery, you know, we're a magazine, right. And we need to just kind of focus on publishing.
For sure. When you're putting these shows on, obviously you talked about how you and Daniel kind of divide up the work, but how much do you collaborate with the galleries themselves as far as you know, the overall theme or the artist lineup? Is it more on your guys' shoulders, that whole part of it, or do the galleries also participate in some of the curation?
Well, the galleries participate in some, but they've been the ones that we've worked with have been really awesome. I mean, you know, we'll say, hey, would you want to do this with us? It's going to be a high fructose show. And these are folks that we've known for a long time. So they already know us and kind of let us, you know, do whatever we want. But, you know, in respect to the gallery, we do try to keep it in line with, because each gallery has their own feel, has their own vibe. Like, you know, Rock LaRue is different than ThinkSpace, and Arch Enemy is different than Rock LaRue. And then it's never, you know, we have we'll pitch a list and be like, hey, if all of this is cool with you, you know, let us know. And there will be some editing, and every now and then they'll add in their own, like, hey, would you guys mind if we put this artist in? And it's always pretty copacetic. I mean, everybody is always on board with whatever is going into a show.
Awesome. And this new show that's opening this weekend at ThinkSpace, is this the first time that y'all have worked with ThinkSpace?
I think so. Yeah, this is the first time we've done a group show with them.
Okay. How did you first connect with Andrew and Elsie and the folks there?
Oh my gosh, I feel like we've known Andrew since day one. We started High Fructose in 2025, and I feel like at some point in 2006, we were in LA. I forgot why we were there. And we stopped by ThinkSpace. And by now they were already kind of like in contact with us. I mean, you know, you hear of a new magazine, you're like, hey, who are you? Tell us all about yourselves. And everybody was kind of curious about who the hell we were. And Andrew was one of the first people to introduce himself. And, you know, we met him and he was really great. He's advertised for a long time with us, and that's a huge amount of support. Kirsten the same. So yeah, I thought it just feels natural to do something
Awesome. And the show's titled Line Addicts. Does that mean it's going to be mostly focused on drawing? That's the first thing that came to mind when I saw the title. Or what's the theme about?
It's artists who already kind of lines and graphic lines are featured heavily in their art already. So it's not themed. So the artists were chosen by the way their art already exists. So like, Dalek, who else? I'm completely spacing Swoon, artists like that. And Daniel is the one who went after most of these artists.
Awesome. So let's talk about what you have coming up. What does the rest of 2024 look like for you? Any print releases, events, things like that?
I'm making art for a show. So there's a local gallery here in a couple towns over from where I live in Albany, Nielsen Arts. We've known Patrick for a little while, the owner, and he's started doing shows. And he said, Annie, do you want to do a show in your own backyard? You never do anything in the Bay Area. I'm like, well, yeah. So I'm going to have a show there in January. I don't remember the date. I think it's the end of January or the beginning of February, and I'm making work for that.
And what was the gallery's name?
Nielsen Arts.
Awesome.
I'm working on a few pieces, like I've got Heiko Mueller, the artist. He curates a group show in Hamburg. I think it's annually. Hopefully, I'm getting that right, and it's called "Don't Wake Daddy." So that's opening in November, and I'm finishing up a piece for that. Doing a little bit of postcard work for Brassworks Gallery in Oregon. And I also have a show at Brassworks in 2026.
Awesome. Very cool. So for the show at Nielsen, does it already have like a title and a theme that you'd want to talk about or share?
I do have a theme, but I'm afraid to say it because I feel like at this point my direction will change again, which has like, this is, and it's also a really cool name. So I'm not sure I'm going to use it yet. But I do have a theme. And it's mostly, it evolved around how much time I spend indoors and how much time I just really hate leaving my house. I'm kind of a hermit. And
Same.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of artists and art people are similar. And so I thought that might be a fun theme to touch on in kind of a funny way, So yeah, that's kind of where that's headed. And I might try to. One thing that I've been thinking about lately is my heritage, and that I'm half Filipino and half white, and I never make art that looks like that. And I would like to try to start making my figures kind of represent that a little bit more. We'll see what happens. It's just like the figures kind of take a form of their own, and I'm just like, I want my figures to just not be the generic cute, pretty girl. And maybe that's just because I'm changing too. Like I'm getting older, and there's that.
Other than spending, a handful of years in the Philippines growing up, do you still feel like you have a strong connection to that heritage?
No, and I'm trying to get back to it. Thankfully, I've got some really wonderful family members who, love me and want to stay connected to me. But like I said before, I feel like I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about that part because it was so natural, and it wasn't a lost part of me. So I ended up spending more time like wondering about like the Alabama family and Southern Gothic, and looking at it that way. And now I'm kind of like, well, why don't I foster what was good for me? Why don't I look at that? Why don't I research that part of my heritage? Like, I've been looking at textile patterns and, like the natural environment of the Philippines is just incredible. And I'm wanting to kind of focus more on that side. It's just as poetic and mysterious as what I kind of dreamed up in my head of, the South.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you have a lot going on. Where can people find you online to stay up to date with all of this?
Well, I'm supposed to have a website, but I don't anymore. I have it. My Instagram is Annie Owens Art, all one word, and I have a big cartel, which is I still managed it. I think it's Ouch Club Store. So terrible. What if I send it to you in an email, and maybe if you have show notes, we can do it that way.
Absolutely.
I have some work over at the Brassworks Gallery that's available, but I don't have a website anymore. So, Instagram is the best way to find me. That's where I post any kind of updates or anything like that.
Awesome. So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Oh, man. Well, this is not in the new contemporary art realm. I'd like to see Lola.
Nice.
Have you had Lola on before?
I haven't. No. A great choice.
Yeah, she's kind of my favorite. I'm a fan.
Awesome. Very cool. Annie, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry that I spaced on this morning and also had to make you reschedule. So thanks for making that extra space for me.
Of course. I'm glad that we made it work out. I'm sorry to hear that you were unwell and weren't feeling too great, but I'm glad we made it happen.
Yeah, that would not have been good. I mean, the sounds that were coming out of my face yesterday,
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Annie. It was really interesting to hear about Annie's experience shifting from an office job at Berkeley to running High Fructose and her personal art practice. Obviously, the topic of having a day job alongside a personal art practice has come up a lot over the years. But I think one key difference with Annie is that it was more like shifting from one day job that accompanied her personal art practice to another day job that accompanied her personal art practice, but one instead that her and Daniel fully controlled and could turn into whatever they wanted. It was also interesting to highlight how wearing it can be, no matter how successful you are, to have to put on a mask while at work, almost like donning a costume or a uniform and taking it back off when you get home. In the last episode, I feel like Ego expressed a similar sentiment when talking about his need to get out of tattooing. And I'm sure that there are a lot of introverts, I am one as well, that have similar challenges with having to mask in these kinds of situations. Just recognizing how draining that can be. It's great that she was able to create a path for her to go down that allowed her to be more herself, while also having the kind of ownership and control that she saw and admired in her former boss, doing her own thing in her own way. I was really happy to hear how eager she is to lean more into personal art practice right now, feeling a renewed sense of creativity. After spending some time away from her personal art, it sounds like she's super ready to jump back in. I'm interested to see what all she creates, and also how this new focus on her Filipino heritage manifests. Perhaps this will all ultimately help her to connect more with that part of herself and her family. And perhaps she'll even make that movie one day. I really hope that dream comes true for her and that she's able to make that happen. It would be great to see that come to life. Be sure to follow Annie's Instagram to keep up with everything. Her new show coming in January at Nielsen Arts, as well as the various group shows that she'll have work in. And then also, she'll have a show in 2026. She has a lot of stuff in the works. So thanks again to Annie for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I am truly grateful for your support. As always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairespodcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.